I couldn't help noticing that we have some leading critics in the audience, Andrew Felder, Leonard Bark, and Georgia Nugent. I hope someone will be able to contribute to the roundtable, which will be after the two final papers. I'm particularly proud of having Jennifer Homans here. She is Van Cleef Alpers professor. She's director and, even more importantly, founder of NYU's Center for Dance and Ballet. This is a unique center which brings together cultural history, critical thought, and practice. Jennifer's career is particularly interesting. Just if you look at her CV, she's a professor now. She was a graduate student in history at NYU, and before that, a professional dancer on the West Coast. So you cannot find many leading historians of ballet who have been practicing at a professional level. And this is very important. It's actually relevant to today's conference because we keep talking about Ovid and the body. So there are two reasons of interest. The first is that reading Ovid is an embodied practice. Italo Calvino famously pointed out that we also read with the body when we read Ovid's Metamorphoses, not only with the brain and the eyes. So it's time to take this a bit more seriously with Jennifer. And the second is that if we look at the cultural history of Rome, it is evident, also difficult to prove, that Ovid's Metamorphoses, its inspiration had something to do with the leading art of dance in ancient Rome, the pantomime. So there are also cultural reasons to be very interested in a presentation which is about Ovid's Metamorphoses, the body, and dance. Thank you, Jennifer.
Okay, good afternoon, and thank you all for being here, and thank you to everybody who organized this, to Sandro and Anna and everybody. So today, I'm going to talk to you about dance. You might say, in fact, that the metamorphosis, as Sandro was just saying, of the human body is an intrinsic subject to dance. So it may not surprise you that, I'm being told I can't be heard. It may not surprise you to learn that many 20th century choreographers have taken Ovid's stories and Ovid's book and poem as an inspiration for their own work. Perhaps most notably, the choreographer George Balanchine, who's going to be my subject today. He made a dance on Orpheus in 1928. He made a dance on Apollo in 1928, on Orpheus in 1948. He made Metamorphoses itself, this time Kafka's, in 1952. Those are just a few of his works. In these dances, however, we see a story, almost like the pantomimes that Sandro was just speaking of. But we don't actually see, interestingly, the actual change in the body, the transformation of the body take place on stage. But what I want to talk to you about today is where that change does occur and the actual metamorphoses of the human bodies in Balanchine's life and work. Not in the stories, but in the physical fact of the technique and the ways of moving that he brought to his dancers, culminating in the 1957 ballet, Agon, to music by Igor Stravinsky. So to begin this conversation, we need the before. We need the before to get the after. The so-called classical, if I may, moment in ballet that he inherited and then also infused with the idea of transformation. So bear with me for a brief and selective, I hope, tour of, I don't have a loud voice, of the physical characteristics of ballet as it was first codified in the French court of Louis XIV, obviously with an eye to antiquity, and then later imported to the Russian court, which is where Balanchine learned it, and then began to make his mark. Here is the first position from an 18th century, early 18th century model. And I want to, here, I'm going to actually take this out, and I want to show you some things about the first position, because it's going to set us up for the rest of the talk. So this first position is the same first position that dancers today take at the bar as their first exercises in class. Now, I can't do all of this anymore, but I'm going to give you a little approximation. So if you look at this image, you can see that it's very straight. You could drop a plumb line from the center of his head straight down the middle of the body, right to between the feet. That plumb line divides the body from right to left. It also, there's another sort of invisible line across the hips that's dividing the upper body and lower body, creating symmetries across several different axes. The body the arms are low. You can see the arms are low. The arms are low because we don't want to, in this form of dance, elicit too much passion. So it's a way of controlling passion. Passion happens when the arms go up. So the costumes were actually made so that the arms were kind of glued down. You couldn't become overwrought or too excited. So there's that sort of calm and poise and balance, and then the feet are themselves in a 90-degree position of turnout, not too extreme, a little bit relaxed. It's looking like a noble person who doesn't have to work, who can just sort of hang out, and there's a little contrapposto sometimes, but it's mainly that. Now, if you take the first exercise at the bar, it's the plie. Well, we just think of this as a bending of the knees now, but really at the time it was drawn from the French courts. It was a way of showing humility and deference. So you would bow before somebody that was greater than you, and this is throughout the whole ballet technique, is this kind of encoding of the court forms and the forms of the French monarchy. So that's sort of what we have. I mean, the last thing is really that the dances that then emerge from that replicate those harmonies through the body, and people thought that the dance on the stage could show you the harmony of the spheres. You could see the patterns of the planets being replicated in the patterns of, say, a group choreography or even a single choreography. And those patterns are also replicated in the body itself. So there was a connection between the wrists and the ankles. These are across the different divides, right? The wrists and the ankles, the elbows and the knees, the shoulders and the hips. So that if you're moving, you have to coordinate all of those things in harmony. Everything has its way of being. So the wrist, the ankle, when one moves, the other moves. And so that's a kind of way in which this whole world is constructed, and it is a whole world. That's I suppose, my main point about this. If we take a very quick fast forward, that's the plie and the deference. If we take a fast forward, now we're in the late 19th century, Russia, which has, of course, modeled itself in many ways on the French court and imported ballet and imported this whole system of moving the body. Look at her plumb line. She's on point. She's a little different. Things have changed. There's a tutu. Things have changed a little, but mainly it's the same thing. Her body is completely organized in a symmetrical and solid way. It's like you're placing blocks one on top of another. And if you were to take one out, she's on her toe, so she's going to fall. So you've got to keep those things aligned. It's a body of alignment and balance. And that's really true in the choreography, too, of the French choreographer Marius Petipa, who made Sleeping Beauties, The Nutcracker, Swan Lake, the dances that we all know. which are also organized the way that the early French dances were organized, an artful balancing and coordinating of dancers in symmetrical patterns through these axes. And the body, which is always, of course, a perilous site of emotion and desire, was trained to stasis and harmony, coordinated as well as the oiled court itself. So that's what Balanchine was born into in 1904. He entered the Imperial Theater at the age of 10, just before World War I began. He was 13 in 1917 when the Russian Revolution came. And the whole imperial order, that collapsed. The school closed, then it reopened. And here we're getting a little bit into Balanchine's whole life story, which I think is important for understanding what happened next. He was young, he was alone, his parents were somewhere else. He was with this kind of group of teachers who ended up staying. They were scavenging for food, they had no heat. They were looking for things to burn, to stay warm in the Russian winter. They were surrounded by violence, dodging bullets in the streets. There was illness. He got TB. He was spitting blood. He had boils all over his body from malnutrition. He never forgot. Later in his life, he talked about this, the acrid smell of dead bodies piled in the streets, or the horror of catching rats with his bare hands and eating them. He had nightmares for the rest of his life of shooting and the sounds of executions happening in the streets outside. So this was Balanchine's coming of age. He was at the school long enough to absorb that, and then also to see that under serious attack. And when he started choreographing, he became a dancer at the former Imperial Theaters, but he was sort of moving away from that and choreographing on the side. And he quickly moved to the avant-garde. He worked with Eisenstein. He worked with Meyerhold. He revered the poet Mayakovsky and loved to recite his verse. All is new, stop and marvel. We shot the past. This was one of his first dances that he made. And you can see already the transformation that's about to happen choreographically with her slung over his arm and over his shoulder. So the Mariinsky Theater wasn't happy with this. And one day they put up a sign in the theater and they said, anyone who works with Balanchivadze, his name at the time, will be fired. So in 1924, he and a few dancers fled the country for Europe and eventually to New York City in 1933. And he was in a state of permanent exile. He never returned to the country again except for a visit in 1962 and in 1964. But he stayed in Europe and then moved to the United States. And as he did this, he was facing a really big artistic question. And it was, what do you do with the human body when you've seen it destroyed and mutilated, crippled, piled high in front of crematoriums, as he did in those early years? How do you make a ballet out of that? How do you make a ballet out of that 20th century? And of course, it was only just beginning, so it was a question that would deepen. Now, I'm telling you all of this because of what Balanchine did to the body. We can't understand it outside of this context of chaos, exile, fear, and of the invisible, if I can borrow from Sandro, and disturbing forces at work in his landscape. In the years to come, there were many dead bodies in his ballets, but he also took dance as a fight against death, truly against death, and set out to make ballet and the body more alive than seemed possible. A dancer that might, in the moment faced with death, actually defy it. And there would be a moment that was so alive in dance that it was impervious to any threat. To do this, he had to transfigure the bodies and make a new form, without leaving the old, but doing something different. And once he had his company in New York, and in 1948 he established or co-established the New York City Ballet, his most important project, I think, was choreography, yes, but above all, it was the transformation of bodies and the metamorphoses of his dancers, and especially of his women dancers. This meant training. And I don't mean just getting in better shape. I mean something more violent, at times cruel, working with dancers whose body, the women were the key because he said they can morph more. Their bodies are more flexible. They can be changed, whereas the men are a little bit more into the earth, a little bit more like those trees. So he began with creating a class. So back to that first position, and then reforming these bodies. And I want to show you a little bit of how that actually happened. And Alex, thank you. We're going to look for a moment at a video of the ways in which he worked with the dancers so that you can see that this change is happening and it is irreversible. It's at the level of the anatomy itself. Okay, so the question is really, like, what's going on here? How can we unpack this? And part of what's going on is, okay, the feet are no longer at 90, they're at 180. Those hips have been pried open. Because in order to turn out the feet, you've got to like pry open your hips. And then what's happened next is the spine is being flattened. So that the natural curves of the human form are actually being flattened. This is going down, this is coming up. You're remodeling the entire human form and then asking it to do things that, where you're jumping up in the air and then you're coming down with the full weight of your body onto one foot in this strange new form. So there's a way in which it's kind of brutal. This was him giving class, you just saw. This is can we see? Yeah, okay, so here's an example, the arabesque that she's got here. The normal arabesque has the two hips facing forward and then, you lift the leg, right? But this one is lift the leg and open that hip. So what happens when you open that hip? The entire structure of the body changes, and you have to change everything or you're gonna fall. You get things like this. Look at the way her hip in the back, it's not normal. It's not possible what she's doing. You get this. You get this. And here you're looking at one of the results, which is that you are off balance. He was really interested in taking that balanced body and pushing it way off balance so that it's like a spherical centrifugal world. It's a fourth dimension. It's a very common thing for artists at that time, but that's what he was interested in. So she's got her legs so thrown up, she's completely off balance on her toe. Her arms are flung behind her, talk about raised arms. And this by the way, she's one of the Bacchantes in Orpheus. And she's completely off balance. How is she gonna even recover from that? Same as this one of Suzanne Farrell. It's amazing they can even catch the picture. The other part of it is speed, as you saw in that video. The speed of the body, moving faster, 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 faster. Well, what's that about? Why? Why that speed? Well, what that speed does is it says you are moving so fast that you can't think of anything but what you're doing right this second. So you are living completely in the present moment. The past is gone, the future is gone. It's really the radical present. So there you are, and it's kind of chaotic, and you gotta just keep going to stay alive. The more, do more. is another way of making that happen. It's kind of putting you, as one critic put it, at the acute edge of risk. So that this body is no longer the balanced, aligned, poised body that it was before. And I want to show you, this is a self-portrait that Balanchine drew of his own body, and perhaps of the ways in which he was fantasizing the morph of other bodies, the metamorphosis, maybe we could even say, of other bodies. The point, if I may just summarize, is that these bodies, these new Balanchine bodies, and this took decades to arrive at, move as one organic piece from head to toe. There's no stacking, there's no blocks, there's no parceling and, up, down, right, left. They can bend and contort and even break without losing their beauty or form. They can transcend and they can endure. Their movements can be grotesque and tangled or out of joint, or beautifully patterned and harmonized across multiple body planes and spatial planes. So much more complex than that previous body. But, and really kind of here's the catch of the whole thing, this whole body has no clear axis. It has no tonal center. Its foundation stone, worse, its default, is chaos. The physical home, the positions of balance and return have to be made and remade at every turn by the dancer. Stability and perfection, the old classical mantras, were death and had to be fought with sheer energy and the will to life, sent coursing through the body in dynamic oppositions that just might hold, thanks in large measure to music and immense physical energy. So that's where he sort of ended up. And these dancers just really, the whole point is movement. It's all about movement and morphing your body into something else. Because to dance in this body is to know that you're on the edge, that it might all give way at any moment. Don't stop, keep going. If you stop, if you pose, if you stand, you're just, it's death. And you don't want to do that. So keep moving or else you're going to fall. So you just got to keep going. So it's a physics of energy and time, but it's also a physics really of anxiety, of tremendous anxiety. The cost to this could be high. This idea of training the body in this way, the bodies were all shapes and sizes, tall, voluptuous, smaller, thinner. And what mattered really to Balanchine was that you show, that you reveal the human form. And that could mean, and I'm just going to give one example here of some of the cost of this, could mean paring down the body, literally sculpting the body, less flesh, more bone. Too fat, dear. I can't see you. I can't see who you are. In part of this idea of seeing through flesh was a kind of mystical thinking in which the fallenness of the body was thought to be thickened with unrefined matter, fat. In practice, of course, this exerted a powerful and often self-destructive hold on their minds. It got inside them like a vigilant inner eye, tracking their shapes and appetites. He objectified them, they objectified themselves. This could lead to serious harm: dieting, pills, weight loss, excess exercise, long hours, too little sleep, all of the things that we're familiar with in what later became anorexia. Self-punishment, a pattern of privation. Add to this the erotically charged atmosphere of the theater, with practically naked young bodies, working long hours and living in close quarters. All of that was kind of part of the ignition, the fuel that animated and also tormented their bodies as they strove to achieve these almost impossible acts. He said, sculptors work with wood or marble and chisels. I use dancers and steps. And the key here, I think, is except that you might say, well, it's Narcissus, it's Pygmalion, but no, he handed the chisels and the mirrors to them. So they're involved in this in a way that's kind of interesting, and I would have said Ovidian. So it's not only the bodies that were the subject of Metamorphoses, it was their inner lives, their whole spiritual, psychological, internal beings. He got to know them extremely well. He was very careful to do that. He had to, because the dances he made were made of them, and the dramas that they were all living in this theater, this closed world place that had, after all, a sun. As the sun for them was a spotlight. It's just, the theater has no source of light. So it's a closed space that you're in night and day. And that was their world. The other thing about these dancers is that, and I've spoken to a lot of them, so I know that they were always young women. We're talking 16, 17, 18, with stories of loss. Almost always, stories of loss. No father, abuse, displaced, immigrants, something. And a kind of adventurous streak that got them somehow to New York. And it's their stories, really, and we don't have time to go into their stories, obviously, here. They could be gathered into a kind of Ovidian collection. And in fact, they were, except in this case, the poem was a dance. Those bodies, those stories, those women are the dance, which brings us to the ballet Agon. In 1956, when Balanchine and his fifth wife, Tanaquil the cleric, were on a company tour to Europe, she contracted polio and was paralyzed from the waist down. Oh, I thought I had her picture here, but I guess I don't. We seem to have skipped a couple. That's okay. Which brings us, so she was paralyzed. This was a huge tragedy in his life. And at this moment, when he took a year off trying to get her back to dancing, which of course was never going to happen because she was very seriously ill, he ended up making one of his greatest dances, Agon, a dance for 12 dancers, a dance of a partially atonal score, with a pas de deux that we're going to see a little section of. Now, this dance was abstract. It had no sets that we think of as sets, just an empty stage with a lot of light, which is, after all, the only approximation we have of infinity. No costumes, only practice clothes. The style was frontal, not pretty and poised from side. It was like a modernist painting, straight front, direct, flat canvas, no acting, no storytelling, just movement, just revealing that body. The movement went back to those 17th century forms, simple walking, simple symmetries, but it also moved forward to the 20th century street. And when he was asked what it was about, Balanchine said, it's about 26 minutes. He called it an IBM ballet, computer that thinks, an indication of how he was thinking of the body as a machine, and also part of the Cold War competition with the USSR for the first supercomputers. It was also about civil rights, because we're in 1957 and he cast a black man and a white woman at a time when these artists would not perform together on stage, much less in sexually and erotically entwined pas de deux. The pas de deux was cold, internal, and devastating. And it had a musical form, which I think is the musical form was really the form of Balanchine's dances. It was his poetic form, his verse. So what I want to do now is just show you Agon, and I think I'm still within time, just a couple of minutes from the ballet so that you can get a feeling for what this is like. Many of you may have seen it already, I don't know. So to end, I just want to read you briefly something about Agon, because the question of Agon was, and what he was facing here, was the question of ballet itself. What is this thing that banishes fear and pain, and yet is itself based on fear and pain, that admits no bestiality, and yet is itself bestial, or at least animalistic, that hangs its harmonious bodies like angels in blue light, but screams flesh and blood, that coldly strips the body of ornament and display, no costumes, fabric and costumes, removing it once and for all from the clothed civility of society, that insists that the deed, the dance, is greater than the word, and that a dance has no past, only a fleeting present. You will not glimpse these creatures in all the history of literature and art. Who are these strangely voluptuous and depleted figures, seemingly bent on weight and their own physical and erotic presence, but also on disappearance into nothingness of spirit and air? Agon was one answer. And what I want to leave you with is that as we watch with Agon is the idea of Balanchine building in ways analogous to those that Sandro Marchesi illuminates in Ovid's poem in his introduction and text. It could be said that Balanchine created his own modern mythology that was less about characters or gods than about dancers and dance, with their own morphological qualities and purpose. Dancers who inhabited Balanchine's dances, not so much to convey stories, but to show the metamorphosis over time of their own bodies and beings. Balanchine's Metamorphoses. So, thank you, ladies and gentlemen.